Hi everyone, so this particular video is going to be on how to create a two-column layout using Dreamweaver. And so I have Dreamweaver opened up here already, and I'll also work through kind of parts of Dreamweaver to kind of help you navigate this application. So the first thing whenever you start a website is you need to have a folder in which you define your files, and we call that a root folder. It's got to be kind of this main folder, your website folder, something that you put images in, you put your files in, you put your HTML pages in, everything, videos, whatever it is all saved within this one folder. And then you also want to go in and you want to organize it throughout that folder. So for this particular file that we're going to set up, this two column layout page document, I'm going to go ahead and just create here in on my desktop a new folder that I'm going to call two-column layout, and then that's what I'm going to go ahead and put this in. So I'll call it two-column layout. And inside here, just to kind of show you how you would maybe go in and kind of set up folders like this. This would be probably the name of your website, whatever that would be. And then you want to go in to that particular folder and you actually want to create folders for your different documents. So you might have a folder in here that would be called your CSS. So this is where all of your CSS pages would be saved. You might have another folder in here that would be maybe called images. And keep in mind that when you do this too, that spelling is key. So when you're doing a website, that you want to make sure that whatever you use for spelling for anything is what you do when you actually write the code. You need to have it very specifically the same thing. So in other words, if I make a folder here called images and it's spelled with a small I, M-A-G-E-S, and then I'm writing the code for that, I cannot then for the path write in there capital I-M-A-G-S for images. So it has to be spelled exactly how it's spelled here. You might also have a folder called, videos, let's say. So maybe you have another folder in here called videos. And then what you want to do is just go ahead and save your images and save your videos and save your CSS and so on. Everything is saved within these folders. So it stays nice and neat and organized inside of this root folder, your main folder. This is your file folder for your website. So your website folder contains everything in here. All right, so I have that done. So now I'm going to go ahead and define that as my site. So I'm going to go in here and do into Dreamweaver now and do my site, new site. And inside here, I'm going to name it my two-column layout. And then I'm going to navigate, click on my folder button here, and I'm going to navigate to that actual file here, that folder here, that I actually just went in and kind of set up and defined as my website. So that's going to be my two-column layout, and I'll go ahead and say choose. So now that's done, and I'm not going to, for this particular video, I'm not going to get into all the surfers and advanced settings and all of that in here. For now, again, we're just going to do this two-column layout, and I want to just show you some of the basics for this within Dreamweaver and how to kind of navigate Dreamweaver a little bit to create that. So I'm going to go ahead and say save. And then this went ahead and built that sitemap. So over here, you see you have your folders, CSS, images, videos. Nothing, of course, is in any of those. But there you go. It went and grabbed that folder. It said, this is everything you have in that folder. And so this is what this is going to look like. All right, well, go ahead and we'll start a new file in here. So I'm just going to go up here and do File, New. You can, of course, down here below, you can click down here and do a new page or a new folder, new whatever you're looking for down there, but you can do it down there as well. I'm just going to go ahead up here and say File, New, because I want to kind of show you this screen as well. So the new document here is going to be in HTML. Now you also have site templates and starter templates, but you really need to be able to kind of have a handle on and be able to navigate HTML or understand HTML and CSS a bit before you start using these templates, because you go in here and you use these templates, and then it's really kind of becomes complicated if you don't know what you're doing, trying to navigate around through this template and, be able to add images or change it a bit with how you want it to look and, with how you want the design to be. So I don't recommend, excuse me, got to drink some water here, that you do that right off the bat, unless you kind of know what you're doing and you get a handle on things, and then maybe you can use an HTML template or whatever it is you want to do in here. They also have in here Bootstrap, and I told you earlier that, that justthemaclab.com. This is how I built that website, the justthemaclab.com website. So I built it through here, through using Bootstrap. And I did it with Bootstrap because I wanted to make sure that it was responsive. And so when you build in Bootstrap, it does make it responsive. So that was, and by responsive, I mean that, when you close up the browser window, that it automatically shrinks up your website as well. And the website kind of flows with that. If I go in here to that website, to Just the Mac Lab that I kind of had showed you earlier, in here you'll notice that as I close this up, you see how you end up getting your little hamburger icon up here so that you can click and choose your menu here. So this would be, say, for your phone. This would be the appearance. Here is kind of, for iPad maybe. This is for a smaller screen window. So that's what I'm talking about with responsive. It also goes in, and it has all of this is responsive. So you can see as I shrink up this window as well, that, sorry, my mouse just quit on me, that this will shrink up as well. So let me get reconnected here. But as I shrink this up, you'll see that now, all of this shrinks as well. So here is, the files are a little bit smaller. It repositions them for you. If I go back to kind of where we were at with the logos, this also is, shrinking up for you and so on, so that you can kind of view it a little, ends up coming into a 2-column layout here, at one point, so that you can see that. So that's what I'm talking about with responsive. Now they do have in Dreamweaver, they do have responsive templates in here as well. But I kind of just went, when I kind of built that site, that I just went in here and did it through Bootstrap. It was, it's a little different language, so you have to kind of know Bootstrap before you, dig into that. You have to know how to change colors and so on. It's just not the same thing. But anyway, it worked for me because I know that language and know how to do Bootstrap. I'm going to call this my 2-column layout. So you would just kind of give it a name. And then for this particular video, I'm just going to go ahead and say create, and there we go. So now to describe this kind of to you, what this means with the exclamation mark, doc type, a space, and all your spaces and all of your different symbols that you might use, like an equal sign or a quote or so on, all of that is HTML language and it means something. So you have to be really careful with what you do with naming conventions. You don't want to, when you name something, add any kind of crazy symbols to the name of something. You want to use underscores instead of hyphens because, you know, a hyphen means something in HTML. So you want to make sure you use underscores if you want a space somewhere, that kind of thing. Don't use a space when you're doing a naming convention. Don't use an actual space. If you want a separation between two words, you need to use an underscore. But for this is how this language is written. So it's a left caret and then exclamation mark doc type HTML. So that's just telling the internet that it's an HTML document. In between HTML and the closing tag of HTML, this is your entire website. All right, this is an opening tag. So it's left caret, HTML, right caret. That's your opening tag. You always have to have accompanying an opening tag, a closing tag. So down here at the bottom, at the end of all of the information that's going to be built into this website is going to be your closing HTML tag. And that's written with a left caret / HTML right caret. So your closing tags always have that / right before the name of that tag. And then you always have your left caret and right caret to close that. All right, in between the heads, so this section right here, this head, what it contains inside of there is all of your CSS information, links, your metadata, so that's for search engine optimization. We'll talk about that in another video. And then you have your title. This is what appears when you view this on a website. So that's your title. And then don't forget that you need a closing tag. So head is the opening tag that contains metadata, contains your title, contains all your links, contains your CSS. And then you have a closing tag again with a /. So it's left caret / head, right caret. Opening tag, closing tag. In between is all the information that you need for that. All right. The body here, what this contains is your actual website. So everything from the opening tag of the body, so left caret, body, right caret, that's your opening tag of the body right here. All right, everything between there and your closing tag of your body is your entire website. You want to make sure that when you start adding that information in here, that you are not going in here and all of a sudden putting some header up here, a div tag up here, something, you know, right at line 7 up here that you want in the body of your website, but now you've plopped it up here, so it's not going to be in the body of your website. In fact, your website probably won't even function because this whole code is just kind of broken to pieces. So again, everything inside your website is right here in between your opening body tag and your closing body tag. And then we have that closing HTML. Again, opening HTML, closing HTML. All right, so that's kind of the layout of, you know, a basic HTML page. I'm going to save this page and I'm going to call it 2-column layouts. So Command S. And then I'm saving it as 2 underscore. Again, remember, don't use hyphens. Column. And then you have to make sure, again, spelling. And you also have to make sure that you follow some form of naming conventions here. And by that, what I mean is you don't want, this is my dog Barney, and isn't he pretty for the name of your JPEG? Okay, so Barney.jpg is just fine. And you have to make them specific as to what the image is or what the page is about, so that you know what the page is about. Because if you have this whole website in here and you've got tons and tons and tons and tons of files, you open images and you've got tons and tons and tons of images, Well, you need to be able to find, you can't have image 1, image 2, image 3, image 4, image 5. Well, you don't know what any of that is. So you need to be very specific about what you name things. And then you also need to follow a naming convention. No more than 10 to 15 at all letters here for naming. And even that's kind of, kind of becoming a little bit dangerous, I guess, maybe with the code. But you need to just make it as short as you can. This is probably, I don't know, close to 15 or something, and that's fine. This is kind of a nice name. It works. All right. All right, and then I'm just going to click save. I want to make sure that it's going into my 2-column layout folder, root folder. One of the problems that a lot of people make is starting out is that they don't navigate right. So they go and they save this file, but they don't know where they just saved it. So they saved it somewhere outside the root folder, and that's, again, very dangerous. Everything needs to be inside of this root folder. All right, so now I'm going to do the HTML part of the 2-column layout. And for in here, I'm just going to type this in for now. So, we want a header. Now, I could go up here and say insert header. So, that would work. And then it's going to say, where do you want to put it? Do you want a class style? Do you want an ID? Do you need it to add a new CSS rule or something like that to it? And then if I say, okay, it's going to give me my opening tag on my header. So here it is. And then it says content for new header. So that's, what it goes in here. You can see that it's up here. It types that in up here. And then when you're ready to put whatever information you want to put in here, you would just go ahead and type in your information or whatever you want. So you can do it that way. I also like indenting all of these so that, again, visually it gives me a good visual of what I have where. But that's the first part of it, is header. Now, the other thing that I want to talk about that I didn't do right up here at the beginning is what you need to have before I even do kind of my header and everything else that I want to put in this website. What you need to have in here is a what we call a container or a wrapper. Doesn't matter what you call it. Everybody has their own means of calling it something. But what it's going to be is a div tag. Div tags are just, you can envision it as like a box or a rectangle or something that encompasses a bunch of information. And what you want is to have your entire body of your website wrapped inside of some kind of a div tag, some kind of a wrapper, something that is going to encompass this whole site. And the reason for that is because then when you view it, that you don't have all of the elements of your site floating all over the place. It's going to all be contained within this one box, within this div tag. And then you can also control the site, especially for responsive then, by, say, putting a percentage of a width on that box, on that div tag here. And then when somebody views it on a smaller screen, like say something that's 720 by 480, something like that, because you put, say, 100% on that div tag, well then regardless of what screen they view it on, whether it be a desktop like I have here right now, or whether it be a tablet, it'll still be 100% of that screen. So it's another reason to make sure that you encompass your div tag or your website and that whole body with this div tag. So I'm going to write that next, and I'm going to kind of start it out here a little bit. I'm going to just indent it a little here so that I can see that. And again, you don't have to do any indenting, but it really makes it a lot clearer if you kind of space these out, do this indenting so that you can see what is encompassing what is inside of what. So the way you do a div tag is it's just your left caret and then div and then a space, and then you have to name it because you can't just have divs all over the place, all these, div tags, all these separation of tags. So I'm going to call it div, and then I'm going to give it an ID equals, and I'm going to call it container. Now, when you do your, when you name something, you always have to have that name in quotes. So that's why I went in here and I gave this a name and I put quotes around it. I'm going to do my right caret to end that opening tag. And then I'm going to go down to the bottom here and close that div tag. Right before my body here, I'm going to go ahead and close that div. So it's left caret / div. I don't have to put the name in here at all. And again, I'm going to move this back a little bit just for my, for my own visual, because I want to make sure that, I have these kind of lined up as they are. Now, so that you kind of visualize this, I'll save this, but I'm going to go ahead and start then my CSS. So you can envision how all of this is kind of coming together. So I'm going to go in here to my files panel over here. And in the CSS designer, which I showed you just very briefly the other day when we had our Zoom meeting, I'm going to go ahead and add a new CSS page. So I'm going to say create a new CSS file. I'm going to call it base, and you can call your CSS files whatever you want to do, whatever you want to call it. But I'm going to call it CSS. I'm going to put it in my CSS folder here. And then I'll call it again here, base.css. And that's where I'm going to save it, is right inside of there. Now, you don't have to have a CSS folder. It just depends on how many CSS pages you're going to have, whether you want to organize it like that or not. It's kind of up to you. It doesn't have to go in a folder. All right, I'm going to say save and then say OK. And now you'll see in my files panel that I do have that base.css inside of this folder. So it's right here. And then also I have my base.css in Dreamweaver. That's going to show up here. Now, if you're using brackets, it's going to show up in the left column there. So once you create that CSS and you create it inside of the folder that you defined in brackets, you define a folder in brackets pretty much kind of the same way as what you just did here. But yeah, when you do that, so then it will kind of show up in here. And then here's the code. This is what your CSS looks like. This is the page and how this begins. So here's your source code. And then just be careful and make sure that you don't end up going, back and forth into and typing some CSS inside of here somewhere that you didn't want. Make sure you always use this base.css. Now I want to show you your source code a little bit here for 1 second. Remember I said inside of this head goes all of your links to all your CSS. So here you go. You've got this link here, and then it's href equals. And again, this is just how it's written. And then in quotes, again, anything that you name, anything after, a reference here, a link reference is in quotes. This CSS, that's the name of the folder. And / here means folder. So when the internet, again, you put this in, it starts hunting for this CSS. It's going to look for a folder, / folder called CSS. And inside this folder, it's going to look for a file called base.css. And then this doesn't really, you know, doesn't need explanation. It's just, it says relative. It's rel for relative equals style sheet and in quotes and type equals text. And that's it. I mean, but this is how it's written. If you're hand coding it, this is how it's written. When you link something, even if you're linking a file or something, that's how it's written. So anyway, just showing you that once we added this CSS, that it did show up over here. All right, what I'm going to do next is kind of define my div tag in my CSS. So I want to go in here and kind of add in my CSS designer. I want to go in here and kind of start adding some properties in here for my two-column layout so that you guys can visualize this two-column layout and you can kind of see what's going on here and what I'm doing. So it's just not a bunch of, you know, code here that makes no sense to you whatsoever. So I want to show you what happened when we put in this container. If I go into my CSS and I define that. So I'm going to go ahead and add a selector. And for the selector, I'm going to make it my background color. So I want to go in and say my div. This is going to be for my div tag here. And it's going to be for the container. Now, when you do a div tag, the code and this, you know, to try and, you know, make it so it's not too complex for you. But for the code, whenever you see a div, and you're going to go in here and you're going to actually define some kind of a selector for that. If it's a div with an ID equals something, then what you have to put in here is a hashtag, since it's a div with a name. And again, in Dreamweaver, it's going to go ahead and kind of give you that prompt. So it's going to say, okay, container, all right, there it is. And I'm going to say, okay, that's the one that I want to work on right here. I want to work on this container. Now this gives you over here all of these options, and I'm sorry that I can't make the window any bigger in here, but it gives you all these options in here that you can use as far as your width and height and so on. So, and background colors and what have you. If I scroll down through this, you'll see that it has, you know, things like your floats and so on. You'll be using that a lot. And then you can click also on up here at the top to get to these different properties. So let's say I want to go to the background and I want to add a color. I would click right here on background, and then I go ahead and choose a color. So I'm going to do like a, I don't know, blue, purple, aqua theme here. The colors probably won't come out very well, but we'll see what happens here. I'm going to do like a blue. And then go ahead and, you know, select that, hit enter. And now it's not showing up over here yet because I don't have any width and height. I'm not really defining that, the size of that container. So it's not really, you know, showing up here at all. I'm going to save that CSS here. And then I'll go back in here over to my designer panel once again and click on here. And then what I want to do is kind of give it a width and height so I can start seeing that. Now I'm going to just type this in. You could click on here for your layout and say the width is X and the height is X. But I'm just going to put in some numbers here to give it a height. Because right now the reason why it's not showing, you'll see that it's kind of blue up here. It's showing you that it's there. We just can't see it because there is no width and height on it and telling it, you know, what you wanted it to be. So I'm going to go ahead in my code here and I'm just going to type this in. So I'm going to give it a width. And so when you type this, it's a width and then you do colon. So width, colon, and I'm going to give it a width of 960 pixels. And you can give it widths whatever you want. I'm just doing something definitive here so that as I lay this out, You could give a percent or something if you wanted it 80% of somebody's screen or somebody's window. You know, you can do that. I'm just giving this a width of 960 so you can kind of see what it's going to look like. You'll see it next when I put in the height. So the next thing I'm going to do is my height. And again, this will prompt you. So if I start typing that H, it's going to go ahead and prompt you, and you can just click on that. And I'm going to give it a height of 720 pixels. Now, a lot of times what you want to do too is when you're building a website that you would want to go in and give it a height of, say, auto, because that's what controls now the height to include the information that you put in there. So in other words, you may have a site here that you have to scroll all the way through to get to a lot of information. Then you wouldn't want to be putting in a height of 3,000 pixels or a height of 2,500 pixels or something like that. You would just give it the height of auto, and then it would go ahead and expand the height of how much material, how many pictures, how much text, how much information that you have on that particular page. So normally I would start out giving it an actual height, and then once I get a little bit, just so I can visualize it and see it, once I get a little bit of information in there, then I'll go back and change my height to auto. All right, next in here, what I want to do is something that's absolutely the most crucial thing that I can ever teach you here, and that's setting up how we center a website. So how you center a website is when you do your container, remember that container now is encompassing your entire website, okay? And when you do this container now, you need to put in your margins so that your left and right margins are 0 and your top and bottom are auto. And that's what is going to control this. So if you do a margin of 0 here and a margin of 0 here and then auto, this whole thing is going to pop over and end up over here in the center. So in other words, when your screen closes up, and I'll show you this in 1 second, but when your screen closes up, then what's going to happen is the window will close up with it, and you'll see up there now, see how it just jumped right into, jumped right into the center there? So initially, before I had this typed in here, I'll go back here, before I had this typed in, it was over there on the left, see? And then as soon as I typed this in, it went to the center. So this is how you center your website. This is crucial. Margin, colon, and then 0 is for your top and bottom, auto is for your left and right. And that just means that the left and right here, auto, is whatever the width of that window is. Now I'll save this and I'll show you what that looks like. So I'm going to go in here and click on here and view it in Safari, and then I'll close the window up here and show you that as I open this out, see how it's all centered. And then as I close it up, now if I had a percent in there, it would close with my window. Right now it's just kind of, closing up and then collapsing to the left. And that, of course, is for a video for a later time, a lesson for a later time. That would be responsive. Right now, because I don't have a percent in there, it's not responsive. All right, the next thing I'm going to do, since we already have our, and then one last thing. So you'll put in, if you're actually typing this in, and you'll notice too that all this information that I just put in there, see, is right over here in your designer. So you can actually just type this in here, and then Dreamweaver will write that code for you over here. So it's written with #container or #container. In you guys' days, it's #container. For me, it was a pound we would order it as like a pound of butter. That's how we ordered things when we ordered through our milkman. All right, left curly brace. And then you go ahead and type in all of the CSS that you want to have applied to this particular tag that you've done here, this div tag. And then you need to make sure that you end with your right curly brace. So these opening curly braces and closing curly braces is crucial. All right, let's do the header in here too while I'm in here. So I'm going to go ahead and type in my header. Now I could go over here to the side and I could add a selector and say header. So I'll do that just to show you. And then I'm going to hit enter. And now you see I have my header. And then again, it writes that code for you. So it'll give you your left and right curly brace. And then all you have to do is put that information in between your left and right curly brace, whatever it is that you want in here. So I'm going to give it also a background color. Again, you can do that through here if you want. So you can go in and say, you know, background color, and I'll do, excuse me, some kind of a green or something like that might look good with that. I'm going to hit return. And then again, you don't see anything here for the header yet because again, we have not given this a width and height. It's here, it's sitting up here, but we haven't given it a width and height. So we need to do that next. So again, I'm just going to type it in here. It's a little easier for me. I'm going to give it a width, and this time to kind of show you how the percent works, I'm going to give it a width of 100%. And that way it's going to go ahead and encompass this whole container. It's not going to go outside the container because remember, we have it over here inside the container. Remember, this is now your closing div for your containers down here. And the header is inside of this container. So your opening container div is right here, your closing is here, and the header is in between it. So that means it is inside of your container. All right, so I'm going to go ahead back to my base, and I'm going to go ahead and write this in here. I'm going to give it a height, again, because of the fact that we don't have a height on here. You can't see it yet. So I'm going to give it a height of like 150 pixels. And now you'll see there's the header. So it just plops right in there. Perfect. All right, I'm going to go ahead now and save that, and then I'll go back to my source code here, and I'm going to go ahead and add a couple other things. So we're going to do let's see, a navigation bar. So that's going to be called nav. So these are all, oops, sorry, left caret. So left caret, nav, right caret, and again, you can do that through here, insert. So that's right in here, insert navigation. All right, and then we'll do our closing nav. And then I'll go ahead and complete this. Let me move this in a little bit so that they're aligned the same, because I had just kind of put my header in there on my own. All right, so after nav, so that's going to be your navigation bar up here with all your buttons and links and so on. Then we're going to do a main content. So we'll do left caret. These are all semantic elements, and I did give you a link to that on W3 Schools. So this main is going to be then all the body of the text. I'm also going to put a sidebar over here, and I'll show you that when we start writing our CSS. You'll see how this is all going to come together. So the sidebar is going to be a side. So I'm going to do left caret, a side, right caret, and then my closing tag. And I'm sorry I didn't start a new line here, but there you go. And then lastly, it'll just be a footer. So again, left caret, footer, right caret, and then my closing tag. And then inside here, of course, you would put your information. So maybe your logo in here. This would be all your main content, text, whatever it is, images, whatever you're going to put in here. Your sidebar, whatever you feel you need in your sidebar. And your sidebar can be, you know, I'm doing a 2-column layout here. The sidebar can be really small if you want it to be, you know, kind of, you know, just a little part over here. Or it can take up half of this space here if you want. So if you want to do actual 2 columns in here, where over here is some content and over here you have some other main content, then, you know, that's what you can do. All right, I'm going to save that. And now let's see what happens when we go in and kind of stylize all this. So this is where I was saying, you know, the importance of that CSS. So this is fine. You can go and you can type all this, you know, information in here, whatever you want. But it's not going to look very good if you don't use your CSS to kind of to go in and kind of tweak it and stylize it and rearrange it. So I'm going to go into my base and I'm going to go back over here. We'll add a selector just so I can show you how you can do it in here. This is going to be nav. And I believe that I spelled it nav. I better have, or it's not going to work right. And then, you know, for properties, again, I'm just going to give these background colors in here just so that you can kind of see what the background color looks like. So with my nav highlighted, then I'm going to go into background color and I'll give it a background color of, say, you know, a different shade of blue or something. I don't know. I'm kind of trying to get a color palette going here, but not sure how it's going to look. All right, so there we go. And then once again, you can't see it up here yet because I haven't added any width or height or anything into it. So I'm going to go ahead and again just type that in myself. It's just easier for me to type it in myself here. So I'm going to give it a width, and you know, you can kind of think to yourself, what do you think I would give the width? What kind of width do you think I would give this? Because I want it to go all the way across my container here, right? So wouldn't you think that'd be 100%, right? So I'm going to do 100%. Put my semicolon. Don't forget your semicolon because the whole thing will not function if you don't have those semicolons there. That'll be some of the biggest errors that you get is you forgot your colon or you forgot your semicolon, all right? And then my height here is going to be 30 pixels, let's say. Semicolon. And there we go. See up here. Oh, it looks pretty good. It's not a bad color, huh? All right, so that's the nav. Let's go in and do the next one. So what else do we have here? Our main, right? But let me start with the aside so I can kind of talk about that. I'm going to have my aside be kind of a little smaller. I'll have it maybe, you know, 100 pixels less than what I'm going to do my main, just so you can see the difference. And so I'm going to go ahead and type that in here, aside. And give it my curly braces again. So left curly brace. Open that up so I can type in my information. I'll do my background color. I'm going to go over to my palette here and do my background color. So I'm not typing all that stuff in here. So this is for the aside. I think I'll do kind of similar to what I did my navigation bar maybe. Maybe a little grayer or something. All right. And then again, I have to give it a width and height. So my width is going to be 400 pixels. So I'm going to do width, colon, 400 pixels. And again, you can do that in the designer panel over here if you want, semicolon. But it's not showing yet because I don't have a height on it. So I need to give it a height. And I'm going to do my height at, well, let's do, you know, let me show you kind of percents here as I'm thinking about it. So let's do a percent on here for your width and height. So instead of doing specifically, you know, pixels on your width, I'll do so that you can kind of see how it works a little better with, you know, if I close up the browser a bit here. So let's just do, say, like 40% for your width, and you'll see what I'm talking about here in 1 second. And then we'll give it a height of, say, 500 pixels. So we'll give both the main and this the same height. So height is going to be 500 pixels, semicolon. All right, now you see it here. It's a percent, and it's sitting over there on the left. Well, now let me show you what's going to happen when I put in the width and height of the main. All right, so main, and then my left and right curly brace, and I'm going to give this a background color. Again, I'm just gonna, it's easier for me to go over here and not type the whole thing in here. So I'm gonna give it a background color of, let's see, main, background color, and we'll do kind of a pale white or something. Again, these colors aren't like the best. I could do pink, that would be fun. But I'm just trying to get them close and kind of be able to decipher between all of these elements on the stage. All right, and then we'll give it a width and height, again, like we did before. So the height, the width is going to be a percent. So I want this to be, I want these to be side by side, and I want this width then for my main to be 60%, right? So it's 100% of the container. So 60 and 40, 100%. So I'm going to do this at 60%. So colon, 60%, semicolon. And then I'm going to do the height at the same, so because I want them side by side. So I'm going to do a height, colon, at 500 pixels. Semicolon. All right, well, what's happened here now? So remember that a side was kind of gray, but that's now pushed the aside down here, right? Because in my CSS, you'll see that the main is first. And so the main is taking precedence over this. And that's why the aside is coming down here. Well, so what do we do about that? So what we need to do is we need to push the aside to the left so it'll plop up and fit into this space up here. So I'm going to go back into my base.css, and for my aside, I'm going to have this float left. And for my main, I'm going to tell the main to float right. So I'm putting the main on the right-hand side. I'm putting the aside, my sidebar, on the left. So I'm going to go in here, and that's what floating is. Floating is taking these and pushing it one direction or the other. So I'm going to have this float right, semicolon. And then now you see it already has moved to the right. This has already come up because it made space for that. But I'm still going to go in and on my aside, change this to float left, just so if I add other information or something in here, it will still remain on the left-hand side. If I do something else with this and I want this to go to the left, it's going to go ahead then and stay on the left-hand side. So there we go. This is your aside, and this is your main. Perfect. And there you go. And now all we need is our footer. So that's another one. So again, to move something to the left or move something to the right, it's a float. Float left or float right. Float left or float right, whichever direction you want to push that. And then you can see again the difference because I put 40% on here and I put 60% on here. I can change my percentages. So I could put my width of this. Now if I change this to say 70 for my side, let's say 30. Now you see there's going to be a space here because I only have my main taking up 60%. So if you want a separation like this in your columns, that's how you do it. You float one to the right, float one to the left, and then just change your percentages here to keep that in, to keep them separated. So that's how you would do that. All right, let's look at the footer. Then that's last but not least, our footer here. And then I'll go ahead in and I'll kind of show you the whole site. So I'm going to do my footer. Now again, you can go in here and you can add it as a selector in here. I can type in footer. Remember that was, again, I'll just kind of go back here. That is here, right here, footer. Your opening tag, closing tag. All right, so footer. I'm going to go back in here and I'm going to give it a background color. And for this, I'm going to go with like another green or something. Just stick with that greeny-ish, try and get it close to the header. I would, you know, if I were doing this for real, of course, I wouldn't be guessing at colors here. I would have some very specific colors or very specific hex values that I'd be typing in there. For this right now, it's just, and I could technically go back here and find the hex value of my header, which is this. So I could actually copy that and paste it into my footer down here so that they're exactly the same. And that's what you would do. You know, I was kind of being lazy there, I guess. All right, so my footer, now what I want this to be is I want the width to be what? So I want it to encompass this whole container, right? So just like before, my width is going to be 100%. So semicolon. And then I have to give it a height. So I'm going to give it a height like of, I don't know, I don't want it that big, maybe 50 pixels or something like that, 70 pixels, I don't know. So I'll do, let's see, height, let's see how, whoops, sorry. So height is going to be, let's do 60 pixels. All right. And now let's see kind of where that is. Well, it's goofy, isn't it? So here it is. You can see it here. And it's actually like right up against the header and the nav. So it's actually right underneath the nav because, you know, it's pushing, it just kind of floated up there because of the fact that we have this float left and float right on here. We don't have anything on here. So what this did was floated right up here and took over this space right underneath your nav, which is your header is 100%, your nav is 100%. So the header being 100%, nav being 100%, that forced this down below both of those. And now this is, but because these have floats on them, it's not clearing this. So what you have to do in order to get that to kind of bounce down to the bottom there is you have to do what we call clearing both your floating left and floating right. And it's written exactly like that. So it's clear, colon, both. And now it bounced down to the bottom, and I'll show you that in 1 second. So now it's down here. There you go. All right, I'm going to save the CSS, and I'm going to save my source here. And then I'm going to go ahead and preview it and show you what we just did. So I'm going to go into Safari, and here it is, a 2-column layout, which you can set up again and design however you want. You can change these percents so these are right up against each other. You can change the percents so that they split right in half. So I could do 50-50, and I may do that just to kind of show you. So I could go into here and change on my base, my CSS here. I could change, let's see, this to be 50. And then I could go back in here and change this to be 50. And now when I preview this, you'll see in here that it's 50-50. So I could do, you know, even columns, whatever I wanted to do. This would be, of course, your logo and title, whatever that you want to put up in your header. Here's your navigation bar. Here's your footer for whatever you want. If you want other navigation down here, some people do that. And then this would be your content. All your information would be in these two tags. So your main tag and your aside tag. And then when I close this up, you'll see, because of the fact that I changed that to kind of a percent, you'll see that it's kind of closing up on itself. It's again going to float to the left because we don't have a percent on our width and so on. So it's going to just kind of collapse into the left-hand side. If we add a percent on our width and height, then that would actually shrink up. That would kind of make that layout responsive. But, you know, that's for another time. I don't want to get into that for this video. But that's basically it. That gives you a 2-column layout. So hopefully you learned something from this. You can play it again. This is something you don't need files for, that you can just do it in brackets or do it in Dreamweaver, either way, to create this layout. So that's it. Hope you enjoyed it.